We'll be talking about crafting transformation strategies for personalized learning analytics, and we are focusing both on what the tool of personalized learning systems might look like, but also more how you craft your transformation. And I think that this spins off nicely from many of the talks to date, both the keynote yesterday and the keynote today, for example. So we're going to do just brief introductions. This is Don Norris, who is with Strategic Initiatives Incorporated. He's president, founder of that organization, and has worked many years on transformation in higher education, and has worked lately on writing organizational capacity to build out the opportunities in analytics. And this is Duin, who is with the University of Minnesota, and currently she was the Associate Vice President and CIO there, and is currently working as a faculty member. While in the CIO position, she deployed the business intelligence operation for the University of Minnesota. And then there's Robert Brodnick, who's with Strategic Initiatives as Vice President for Strategy and Innovation, and has done extensive work on focusing on organizational change and implementation of innovations. And I'm Linda Baer. I have been with the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, a large system in the state of Minnesota of community and state universities, and went to the Gates Foundation and developed the analytics portfolio with them for a while. And currently I'm with the Minnesota State University at Mankato as their interim provost. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Don to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Linda. We selected this quote from Thomas Brown, A New Culture of Learning. What happens to learning when we move from the stable infrastructure of the 20th century to the fluid infrastructure of the 21st century, where technology is constantly creating and responding to change? This is the challenge that we face every day as we try to help our institutions, as enterprises, and the whole industry deal with the issue of how do we scale innovation to be enterprise and industry-wide, and personalized and adaptive learning is at the tipping point where we need to think about how to craft those transformative strategies. Let me take a few minutes. My colleagues and I came up with a set of what we consider the driving forces to be in the marketplace as we look at our experiences. First of all, there's this alignment between learning and competence, employability, and success that's formed in the mind of learners and their families and the policymakers and stakeholders that are supporting at least public higher education. And at the same time, disruptive innovations in the education and knowledge industry are shaking up our traditional ways of doing things, as reflected in major investments by venture capitalists and solution providers that are bringing capital, culture, and capacity and know-how to the industry and making available new forms of technology-supported activity that can support our transformations. Analytics and big data, as reflected in the Gates Foundation's support of work on optimizing learner success, and within the solution provider sector, some people call them vendors, we call them solution providers, a whole new set of tools that are being made available in integrated personal advising systems, personalized learning networks. All of these are emerging with new vendor names that we didn't know 18 months ago, with analytics embedded in them. Personalized learning in institutions is advancing by the work that you all are doing and individuals across the globe, but also federations and consortia and groupings of institutions working together. And finally, the emergence of providers like MOOCs that are essentially coming in with venture capital support with the potential to scale to serve the entire industry, to provide resources that can be used by institutions and tailored and combined with institutional activities, is potentially a very exciting development. So our point here is that there are a whole set of changes that are going on within our institutions and in the greater industry, looking at all of the players in the education and knowledge industry, and these are driving forces that are reshaping the debate on what do our strategies need to look like for personalized learning in institutions. We've come up with a three-stage model that we've used in our work for the Gates Foundation that essentially looks at three stages that institutions find themselves in. The first is institutions that are almost at ground zero, getting started with personalized learning and analytics with maybe a few pilot programs going, but needing to engage the university community so that they know enough to be able to take advantage of the offerings that are being brought together. Stage two is what I think very much the situation that Abelardo described this morning, Pardo, when he described his situation where they have terrific pilot and proof of concept programs that really do work. And now they're dealing with the issue of how do we get these understood at the enterprise, the university level, and how do we move up to the next step? And that's stage three. That's what we're here to talk about. How do you start to craft transformative strategies about how to use personalized learning, learning analytics, educational data mining, all of this, everything in our toolkit? How do you use these things to create transformative strategies?
So we're going to go into a set of 4 questions, and we'd like you to think with us as we move through these questions and what kind of challenges might you put on the table as we talk about these. And so our first question is, how might personalized adaptive learning move beyond pilots to potentially transformative technology? Marcia started with that yesterday as her keynote, that the discussion she was having was about using tools to transform learning, to empower learning, to bring about more deep and sustained learning for our students, and that's what it should be all about. But much of what we've been hearing here are individual opportunities where interested faculty put together interesting tools for their one class. And that's why we might want to continue to ask, how do we push it beyond just one class or even one program, and how might this become more embedded in what goes on? Because if we truly know now that we can improve students' learning, we have an obligation to do something about it. We have an obligation to do something about it. And you're going to hear about different examples of how people have done something about it. To begin then, if you were going to anchor this in crafting solutions that might help scale, you start with the push and pull factors that our institutions are already a part of. And so we might, for example, in the United States, look at accreditation and talk about some of those kinds of things that have to do with learning outcomes. How are we monitoring those learning outcomes, and how are we getting to them? And how are students then benefiting because we are now better monitoring learner outcomes? But the learner outcomes is from more the faculty perspective. Second comes, how do students start taking more responsibility for their own learning? And we have tool sets that are now improving that opportunity as well. And that has long-term benefit, because then our students will be lifelong learners, and they'll be higher critical thinkers, and they'll be able to accelerate what they do. The other thing I'd like you to think about, because we're going to come and wrap this up, but the stories of student success. So for example, Purdue University with course signals that John Campbell began. The story is over 5 to 7 years, they've monitored how students do when they have that tool set that's based on a red light, yellow light, green light distinction. Green light meaning you're doing fine, yellow light means you have a warning signal, you might be in trouble, and green light is, or red light, you are in trouble and you need to get help, and then it matches up to interventions. After these number of years of working on this, they have improved the student retention by 10 percentage points. 10 percentage points means a lot these days. That adds value to the students. And the students are becoming their own advocates now, saying, I had course signals in that class. Why don't I have it in this class? So with that, I'm going to move it over to a counterpoint.
When you move beyond the pilot stage, there's a number of complications. And I'll focus, I mean, we could probably develop a long list. But I'll focus on a couple particular cultural issues. One is the interdependence of the technologies on the curriculum, in the curricula. Initially, you might have a pilot in a particular course, and as you're teaching that course, the course evolves over time. But when you're looking at an entire set of programs, or let's say a university-wide curriculum, you have this loosening or this unbundling that needs to occur. And one of the cultural resistors could be those faculty that are holding on to the curriculum as it was. So identifying that as an early issue, I think, is one. The other is the silos that exist on campus, particularly between IT, the research side, institutional research, and student affairs. One of the examples is who has responsibilities for student success on your campus? Is it everyone? It really should be. But that issue sort of brings up kind of the cultural combatants that occur.
Okay. We've heard about the push and pull. And we've got an example with core signals. And we know we have these cultural, very, very strong forces on each of our campuses. We're constructing this a little bit of as a debate. We may bring up perspectives we agree with or not, but they are ones we've heard or we are perhaps living. I'm currently serving as a faculty member. How do I gain access? I've seen any number of wonderful programs, very different ones, but if I'm in this program over in College A, I use this one. College B, this one. We know it's very evolutionary, but how do educators on the front line really become involved in this? We have our central organizations. IT might be able to collaborate with student affairs and academic affairs and institutional research, but that's a swirl above me. If we're going to have personalized adaptive learning move beyond pilots and be transformative, you have to engage faculty.
So the second question, how should institutions leverage this emerging marketplace of homegrown and solution provider options? And what I'd like to do is talk about two forces at play here. The first is really the evolution of the technology over time. And the second, I'm going to come back to institutional culture. So every institution has a point of entry where something moves from a sort of one-off to a broader organizational change. There's a number of, I would say, cultural trends over time. Leaders come and go. There may be champions of different kinds of technologies, and 2 years later, all of a sudden you realize that this is no longer something we're going to pursue. Pilots have success and failure. Faculty culture shifts over time. Technologies, and particularly funding, to try to scale something to a broad level. You may have some grant funding to do it once or twice, but if you're going to move this to a larger organizational change, it's going to take resources. So at the same time we have these shifts in institutional culture, there's also changes in the technology. And some of you have probably seen this curve before. Has anyone seen this? Okay. And a few have, so I'll talk a little bit about it. This comes out of the Gartner Group's research. It's called the hype cycle. And basically, it's the adoption of new technologies. Now, this is the general model. What they've done over time is applied it to a number of different kinds of technologies. They looked at educational technologies. When Linda and I saw this the last time, we thought that learning analytics was just sort of rising up that curve, the technology trigger, almost to what they call the peak of inflated expectations. Now, the tough news is that we've got a long road ahead of us through the implementation as we go through what's called the trough of disillusionment. And it's a time where those of us who have worked at it and are perfecting things, we're not getting the mass appeal that we would really hope for. But eventually, as the technologies build and resolve themselves, they get to a point where they're actually implementable over time. So as you are trying to bring these technologies to a more mass appeal at your institution, I would say stay at it, be bold, take calculated risks, be a champion when you can, but be aware that with your own institution and those you work with, you need to start where you are and look at the change of technology and the change in culture.
We did some research for the Gates Foundation. We identified the major solution providers that are in the market space, and we've listed them all up here. I'm not going to go through the whole typology, The point is that all of the providers, from ERP providers, learning management systems, visualization providers, all of those people are playing in the analytics space and the visualization space. The new providers in areas like integrated personal advising systems and learner relationship management systems are embedding analytics into their offerings and are playing a role, and many of the new personalized learning and learning analytics pieces can bolt onto these systems. The personalized learning solutions and networks are emerging. Newton and others are out there. Not all of these work as they ultimately will 3 to 5 years from now, but what's happening is a great big mashup where institutions are trying to figure out how to combine their existing enterprise systems with homegrown applications and these new vendors that are becoming available, including big data and data mining solutions, and a new category of sense-making applications available on tablet computers that we're calling success-making systems. We have some examples up here of one called the Education and Career Positioning System that has been piloted at Lone Star College in Texas and combines a personal learning map, degree placement, degree guidance and planning, assessment of the marketplace in your particular areas of interest, and what is your career map and how that maps with your course plan. There'll be more and more of these kinds of systems available, and they're in the process redefining the ecosystem out there of vendor solutions that are available to help institutions as they figure out how can I deal strategically with the emergence of all these capabilities.
So you just heard in relation to the question, how should institutions leverage this emerging marketplace of homegrown and solution provider options? What kind of questions come from that? You heard from Rob, we need champions, we need funding. I think we also need a strategy. If you're going to take this on, you can't be doing this as the Lone Ranger, as we would call it. You need to find collaborators or groups that have common interest at your institution to begin the conversations, but also you need leadership investment. And what we find is when a leader says this will begin to happen, and case in point, another story is Purdue University. So Purdue University started the work on core signals with 1 or 2 faculty interested in improving what their students were doing in the classroom. Well, that was fine, but it took the president saying, I intend to improve our retention and graduation rates by X in this amount of time, that they pointed to this tool and started saying, okay, let's get behind this tool now in a broader way. And so right now they are working on expanding the signals tool that is monitoring students in the red light, green light, yellow light version with interventions across all of what they're calling the gateway courses, what we would call university core or gateway. So I think that's the one thing, but the challenging question probably is, and I would ask you this, think about this, so there are all kinds of vendors out there, and you've probably been to meetings where huge exhibit halls are full of many of those vendors. How do you make sense out of it? How would you make sense out of it? Because are any of you decision makers on that? You want a tool, you go out and buy it? Nobody? Sort of, I'm hearing, sort of.
Or who is the decision maker?
Yeah, who's the decision maker then? Who does make the decision? None of you are decision makers, except maybe. Who is the decision maker?
The CIO.
Yeah. And that's where the vendors often go, and is the CIO speaking with the academic student affairs folks that, as Rob pointed out, are kind of our silos that sit out there. Think about that, because we're going to ask you to come back. This is your time to sort of think this through, because then we're going to ask you again, how do you make sense out of vendors, or what would help you make better sense? And one of the things that Don and I are working on is actually something called a matchup tool. We've done interviews of 40 institutions and 20 vendors, and the institutions are some of the leading innovators, and we want to see what tools they're using for what solution sets, and then be able to tell the story. Institutions like you that are interested in this kind of solution set might be interested in one of these 3 to 4 tool sets.
Linda mentioned, you know, the importance of the president and that leadership and that commitment to learning analytics and academic and learning analytics. How might institutions nurture their commitments to personalized learning and analytics? Yes, with leadership. I've been in any number of meetings where toward the end, as people were making conclusions, they would say, critical is leadership. Let me tell you a story. I'm at the University of Minnesota. It has multiple colleges and it has 5 campuses. One of these campuses is quite new. University of Minnesota, Rochester. Rochester, Minnesota is where the Mayo Clinic is headquartered. And in putting together a new institution there, this is about 4 years old now, hired a new chancellor. Well, he came with a very different vision. He says there will be no colleges, no departments. The faculty will be interdisciplinary. Okay, there are about 40 faculty now, 12 of which are tenure track. The other faculty are student-based faculty. There's clusters of faculty. But more important is that it was built on the beginning, when I think of the opening presentation this morning, it was built in that model from the learning objectives, and so that it built within in that same model. More important, the intelligent system for education and assessment of learning. So if you Google this and add on to your search string University of Minnesota Rochester, you will get to a great deal of, a great amount of information. Well, I'm interested in learning and academic analytics, so this year I've been spending a fair bit of time there and watching it work, because I was a bit skeptical. Can this be done across an entire curriculum? They think in terms of the curriculum. They do not think in terms of courses. Okay? All of the modules, all of the learning objects are available to students across, at any time, and also available to all faculty. And so you work to build on those, the learning objectives in a particular course, say biology, then are tagged across all of the quizzes and things, and an instructor can monitor how they're doing on those, and am I really testing? Are my students really learning what I think I'm teaching and what those learning are? And then when in the opening and the talk about being able to change and be flexible, that's built across the whole as well. Now there are bumps in the road. I mean, this is a in some cases, some of the newest faculty coming wanted that seeming security of a department-based system and moved on to things that to other institutions that reflected that infrastructure. But those who have stayed and have really engaged, it's rather remarkable to watch. But so it was a way of nurturing this commitment. It was a new start. You could have this possibility. The question is, how does that pilot, a successful pilot, be transferred and used in other places across the university? That is very difficult.
I might say, Ann, that you've pointed out that starting a new campus or a new institution is a different thing. Most of us in the audience have to deal with institutions where they are. In the next section, we're going to talk about how you actually turn the momentum of the institution to this direction and overcome this problem of the CIO being the decision maker and not being on the point for these systems.
So another example is from the European collaborative project called ROLL, and rather than take a lot of time on that, there is a presentation on that this afternoon or tomorrow I think. But this was in response to, we can't all do this alone, or we can do it better together. And so this was a group of 6 different European countries coming together to begin to look exactly at how we might put together responsive open learning environments. Whether they'll be called personalized learning systems or not, we don't know. Right now, that's what we're calling them, and they're not necessarily brand new, but they are beginning to take more shape, The Khan Academy idea is one of those where within it, monitoring of where is a student, where does a student want to go, and how do they get their best is one of the premises there. Another idea is this system, and we have flyers on it, the Education and Career Positioning System. It was EPS, Educational Positioning System, instead of GPS. And the idea is this tool is really a continuum for P20 or P lifelong learning. And the idea is the important documents and the important accomplishments or the important test scores or the interest all come together in a place where the student can carry them around. They're theirs, and it's called their vault. Some people called it a backpack, a virtual backpack. But in that might be a degree audit or the personal profile of the student or grants and scholarships that they're interested in with a link. The idea of how to select a college and sometimes virtual tours of colleges. How do you keep moving along? And likewise, carrying the transcript around. I mean, we've been in an era where everything was locked out. The student, how hard is it for a student to get a transcript? And how hard should it be, or how easy should it be? Because it's theirs. And what's the secret? Likewise, we continue to struggle with transfer of credits. What does a credit mean? A credit versus an outcome, but also transfer credits, and where do you receive it, and so on. So I think this toolkit is one of those things, and it's shown here in sort of the rollout scroll computer, that the student carries it around, kind of like a bottle of water, and the screen scrolls out. And so it's got more of those interesting things that begin to help the student stay on point for their journey. I'm here, I want to go there. What are my routes? If I want to accelerate my education, how might I do it in less time? If I want the long version because I'm working and have a family, how do you strategize that? What's the amount of fuel it will take, i.e. how much money, time, resource might need to be invested to get through? One of the problems for us in the United States is students don't always understand how much is it going to cost. Either they think it's going to cost a lot more than they can pay, and they don't even try because they aren't aware of the assistance they might get, or they get into way too much debt while they're roaming around trying to figure out what they want to do and what they want to be. This tool set is to improve their chances of getting on point faster. We know that people who determine a major sooner and stick with it are more likely to be sustained and graduate.
I might add one more thing about this, and that is that in the United States, these kinds of applications are being tied to real world employment marketplace data. And you need to think about these sorts of tools as a bridge between learning and career and work, and a continuing tool that the student might use. So these are very powerful kinds of systems that are stimulating in the United States some very interesting market research involving some of the big employment agencies like Monster.com, to be able to show the way about what are career paths and employment paths that have been successful for people like you. And this is a connection that has not been possible at the personal level until now. But we're seeing it in these new sets of tools as being possible. And then this opens the door to what we do on campus to prepare students for that journey.
So it really perpetuates, there are all kinds of data points that an individual carries around with themselves. And the point of being more focused on the data points about career preparation, I want to be this, what does it take? Students like you as a freshman in high school that want to be a nurse would be more successful if you were doing these kinds of things, these kinds of courses, this kind of summer camp or whatever in the field. So I think what we do is help people make better decisions using the analytics that are becoming more and more available to us.
So our final question, and then we're going to have Q&A. How might institutions align personalized learning and analytics with institutional strategy? Before I get to the strategy, let me talk about the tactics. The description of the notion that the selection of these tools and these software applications is largely the province of the CIO, or in some campuses it's the IR people, the institutional research and planning people, who are behind analytics, who are driving the ship. What has to happen on campus for us to make the transition is that the provost's office and the academic affairs people have to be intimately involved in this. So in campuses that we all work with, we make sure that a team comes together to understand how important this next generation of personalized learning is, in the sense that it is going to move us to a place we haven't been able to achieve. And tactically, for that to happen, the provost office, the academic affairs office, and the student affairs office have to be more involved than they have been before. So in campuses like Abelardo's, where he described this morning about he would love to be able to make the transition from successful individual practitioner to being able to pull the university along to make this a real strategy, those are the tactics that you all have to be concerned with, each of you as individual practitioners, and figuring out how to capture the ear of the provost, the Center for Teaching and Learning, whatever the groups are on your campus that would be convinced that this is a good way to go. So that's the tactics. Now, a moment about the strategy, and then questions and answers with you. Pardon me? Okay. We just take a minute to emphasize this. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but it's our notion that personalized and adaptive learning and the analytics to support it has a singular ability to be strategic, because it enables us to really link learning to the individual, to link adaptive learning to the individual, and importantly, to embed analytics into the process. Whether it's in learning analytics, whether it's in educational data mining, embedding analytics so that many of the measurements are autonomic and do not involve the heavy involvement of the faculty with an extra larding on of responsibilities, but rather having those responsibilities in designing the systems and then having many of the analytics done and embedded is critical to success. Pervasive data mining is going to be possible as a continuation of this. And we are seeing in the United States a great many in the cloud solution providers that are coming to institutions and saying, let us, these are people like Pearson and the learning management system people who are embedding analytics in what they do, putting in some personalized and adaptive analytics, and they're coming in and saying, look, rather than you're trying to do this all yourself, come to us, let us do an in-the-cloud solution for you, and not only will we solve your problem, we will enable you to compare yourselves to the 200 or 300 other institutions who are doing this for us. So you have a peer group of analytically, a peer group of institutions that you can compare with. So how does this actually work with institutional strategy? Many of you probably have never had the pleasure and privilege of being involved in the strategic planning process. This is why you need tactically to work with the provost's office and figure out how to elevate the scheme. But the point is to understand and get the university community to understand that personalized and adaptive learning enables us to not only increase student success, but to align student learning with student objectives, life objectives, career objectives, and provide a continuing and ongoing means of engaging the student along those ends. And it's going to be possible utilizing in-the-cloud providers to dramatically enhance the capacity of institutions to do this. One of the things we did in our Gates work is to look at the state of the talent in the higher education industry, the analytics talent and the talent in these kinds of areas. And that frankly, there's a great talent gap. There's no way that we can do this successfully across the industry if every institution does it alone. Institutions are going to have to collaborate. Institutions are going to have to use vendors to provide important insight. And institutions are going to have to figure out how to bridge that talent gap and raise the IQ of their leadership to be able to do these things. Once you have that in hand, once you have the provost's ear, once the provost understands that this is important for the strategy. Then you can go about crafting a strategy, an institutional strategy for personalized learning and analytics that will enable you to serve students much more effectively than we have in the past and to improve the position of the institution.
Rob and I here are working to follow some of the tweets at the same time here. And one says how to change and who should change that institutional strategy, that the answer lays also in the hands of learning analytics researchers, absolutely. I would want to advocate at this point for the theories and models of shared leadership. It's interesting back at the point of needing to make an investment in business intelligence that would in turn support academic and learning analytics in a role at the time as an interim CIO, because I had figured out the budget and put it there, the other offices automatically assumed that the central IT was in charge of the initiative. So it took shared leadership to then bring a group together, charged in this case by the president, to also bring Vice President of Human Resources, the Provost, the Student Affairs, the Academic Affairs, actually and the CFO as well at the time, together on a weekly basis to just start working on that together. But it takes time, and theories and models of shared leadership talk about the stages that goes through, that oftentimes maybe it's more Minnesota culture, I don't know, but we usually begin by talking nice and very polite, and you know that you're not sharing much leadership yet. And then it sort of goes into this stage of being a little bit more open, honest. In some of our interviews on partnerships, some would say brutally honest, just to get it out on the table. And then as you keep working together, it evolves to a language of inquiry, where you're not just assuming your understanding of that office is correct, and you start bringing things out on the table to be transparent. And from that, you can start to get to generative dialogue, because we can say this group needs to be there, that group needs to be there, but unless you have some models for sharing leadership, we would contend that yes, something may happen and get started, but it perhaps will be less likely to be sustainable over time.
We're going to move to Q&A in a minute, but one final comment. Don and I are planners, and we like to write strategy, and strategy is important. But I'll leave you with a quote from Peter Drucker. He said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And the point being...
I thought it was lunch.
It's lunch sometimes, but it can be breakfast. But the point being, you can affect culture, all of you, in what you do. And you have your own way to do it. And I think, Anne, your comments were very well said. So leaving you with that, the inspiration and hope as you go back into your environments to start to change the culture and eventually head the strategy in the direction of whatever vision you have. So.
Let there be questions.
Let there be questions.
So you did mention a bit about you were talking about how you integrate and talk with faculty and everything, and you did mention about students a bit. So my question is basically, or a comment more in that direction. So we must never forget that we're actually designing for students, and having them be a part of the design process is very, very important. So if we're designing for faculty or administrators, and then for students, that'll change the design for faculty and administrators. So there needs to be a prioritization that we very much need to take care of.
No, you're absolutely right. And what's going on every day in the courses on campus is you're designing for students, and you're designing with faculty in mind. And from that are getting insights into what works and what doesn't, and especially if you open it up to students to say, what would you really like to have? Not just what I'd like to do for you, but what would you like to have? But administrators, and we advise administrators, we advise faculty. The administrators have a difficult job in that they have to understand the strategic impact of this and where all this is going. You know, an administrator looks at a MOOC, for example, the MOOC movement, and asks the question, you know, they ask the question themselves, you know, it seems like this is an interesting possibility. Today, a MOOC doesn't look like something I'm very interested in. But a thoughtful administrator would say, 3 years from now, when the MOOCs have evolved, have had all this venture capital poured into it, which enables them to do things that I can't afford to do here. And when they embed personalized and adaptive learning into the MOOCs and embed analytics in there, is a way, will that generation of MOOC be a resource that I can then use in my classes to flip the classroom, to have the MOOC provide a certain part, and then what actually happens in the classrooms be my faculty engaging the students in conversations, problem solving, and practical applications of the knowledge. But that, you know, that's what an administrator has to look at, that longer term, and the faculty is looking at the immediate of how do I really know this is working? How do I know what I know? Is this meeting the student needs? And all the research that's here at this wonderful conference is about how all of you are pushing the envelope on all these things, a class at a time, a course at a time. How do we mobilize and leverage that course-based knowledge so that those administrators understand strategically where this can go? And that's and meeting in the middle is what seldom happens, because most of you all get shut out of these conversations. So we have to figure out how to have top-down and bottom-up conversations that meet in the middle.
Does anyone remember the woman who is the head of the Boston group? That organization, because it is an entire model where they come in and they work with the students to co-create that next direction and those services. I will find it and tweet it.
Thank you for the discussion. You've mentioned Khan Academy and you mentioned Pearson, but for the vast majority of your discussion, it seems like you are only focusing on colleges and the whole college. And I just wonder, do you just think it's hopeless to drive a transformation through public education K through 12? Because in many ways, many of the barriers aren't there. There's a homogeneity among teachers. Teachers are much less likely than professors to resist change. There's a homogeneity in source funding. There are just fewer silos, more connectivity among the faculty body. So it just seems strange to note that absence unless you just think it's hopeless.
Well, no. In fact, I think I mentioned the P20 connecting point, and that exactly what you're saying is far more might be happening in P12 because of the continuity and you will do this and the expansion of data use. Go ahead.
A related point.
Let me add to that. I think that's a great observation, and we were a little focused on higher education, but just as a neat aside, an adoption path for higher ed has often been when the students come in and say, I was doing that in high school, why aren't you doing it here? And very quickly do you get the attention of those in higher ed to do something. So that's a good point. Were you going to add to that?
Okay. I was going to add another point. I'm from Germany, and my experience is that a very big factor with learning analytics is the law of data privacy, and I would like you to reflect a little bit upon that, because this really turned out something that hinders the process of transferring it to even research is sometimes it stops even research. So what do you think about that?
A really big point that either enables this to move forward or kills it on the spot. Absolutely. We've been in many conversations where somebody will say to us from the United States, FERPA won't let you do that, you know, the federal protection. Frankly, our Department of Education just issued a statement that delineated what was okay and what wasn't okay. And the use of data to improve student success can be used. It can't be used to broadcast behavior of students necessarily, but it can be used to improve student success. And I think that's something that this group could work on, the LAK could work on expanding where is the policy behind this around the world that helps us, because Everardo said to the fact that students opt in or opt out, and that's sort of the sign-off. If I say okay, then it's okay. If I say no, then you're not part of it. So we are at the cusp of having to figure this out. The policy procedures need to come around.
I appreciated his you know, that option and that transparency for the students. So again, getting back to the student theme, their role in that, it's not delivered to them. They can opt in or not in terms of that collection.
Other question?
I'd like to go back to the point about K through 12. In the United States, we have a number of the states that are looking at putting together large data sets to be used by all the all the secondary students with embedded analytics and everything in there, so you'll have that kind of an experience across whole school systems. And as Rob said, when students that have gone through that experience come to higher education, they're not going to be satisfied with a learning experience that doesn't have that embedded analytics that enables them to really understand where they are and adapts the learning to their needs. And this has been seriously considered and being undertaken in a number of the school systems. So we very much believe that it's going to have a tremendous impact.
And I think another point to that is if we start watching the parallel to the health care industry, where we went from serving illness, working on illness-based information to wellness-based information. If you put that parallel up with education, it's a access, students come in, but how do we move toward more of the success side of that equation? And so if you read McKinsey's report on big data, you'll see where higher ed is according to their research in relation to big data at all, and we're not really in the game right now. We believe that the use of analytics to the benefit of student success ends up being one of the game changers. The money invested becomes a better investment. You can accelerate what's going on. For those that are high flyers and want to move faster, they do, and they get into employment sooner, and our economies sure can use that. Those that need more assistance along the way are assisted as they go. So I think that this really is an important space.
Hi, Vic Borden from Indiana University. What's the meaning of life? No, okay, I'll get back. They wanted me to ask that. When you started talking before about who buys the software at the beginning, and I was thinking, well, we're at a large university and we don't have the IT office buy the software, or at least put out the RFPs and evaluate the RFPs. That's done in the functional areas, which aren't always that functional, but so the student area does the student systems, the human resource area does the HR systems, and so on. So I'm thinking that in relation to the question of where learning analytics fits. And that would come under the teaching, learning, and technologies area, which is more a hybrid. So then later on, Don, you asked or posed that maybe you could have all the learning analytics on hand that faculty can use without having them to do the heavy lifting. But I'm trying to think of how that relates. You have the functional area expertise deciding what exactly is needed in a student system or an HR system, and in a teaching and learning system, it's a very broad and diverse, more so than even the other systems. So different faculty in different areas are going to have very different approaches to pedagogy and different needs. It doesn't seem like there can be ready-made tools. There might be a library, if you will, or some things available, but there's still, the most important thing is that process by which faculty become familiar with, comfortable with using analytics in course design, and therefore they have to be comfortable with course design, which they aren't necessarily. So I wonder two things. One is, have we not debundled it appropriately? Are we talking too generally about learning analytics, and maybe there are some important distinctions we need to focus on for it to be more feasible? And two is, maybe we should forget about the people now teaching because they'll never get it, but no, but seriously, how do you work in analytics? Do we have the preparing future faculty movement, for example, where in graduate schools they get people oriented towards teaching, and that certainly seems a place for it. So somehow you have to get into the system to do a very different set of behaviors among the people who are or are going to become the faculty to effectively use it, and the using has to be very tailored to specific areas, and I don't know that we have the organizational capacities currently and structures, the right ones in place. So what would those correct structures look like if it's not currently in the portfolios?
Well, one of the first things we did was do an audit on how many tools are in your institution right now. If you really cared about coordinating it better, we were working on an audit. So what is Student Affairs looking at? What I think the answer to your question, or the beginning of an answer might be, is as the learning management systems and course management systems evolve and include more embedded analytics, that will be the frame. And then, as you said, faculty will either participate more or less, or will go beyond that in relation to what they're doing. So it may come to that, and you have a comment on that back there. Do we have somebody else has a comment first? Okay.
Yeah, one approach is taking the long view in terms of faculty development, and there's things, competencies for faculty to do what they do well. And I think we in this room understand that being able to manage analytics as part of the learning environment is going to be the future. And how does an institution start to move in that direction? You have your long view of attrition, that those in grad school now will see these tools and adopt them, and when they start to teach, they'll use them, and eventually it'll spread. And then you have the sort of training and development approach where if we're going to do a mass implementation of some kind of technology, we've got to get 30–40% of the faculty up to speed within a year. So I think there's different kinds of approaches, and once the inventory is done and once sort of the long view is established, then an institution starts where they are and puts in place the things they need. That's a good question. We all we're fighting for the mic right now.
I'll just add just one. One privilege I've had these last set of months is identifying what Warren Berger at Michigan would call the millennial faculty. And so when we think about the millennial faculty and watching them and seeing how they work, and working with a number of those, when we talk about analytics, they've termed it home brew analytics, because they say all these different things. There are so many tools out there. What's the, and then what is your personal learning network that you've deployed to continue to teach you about these different tools? So there's a couple dozen people just sharing things all over the place, as is likely, happening here. But I'd say, where is that homebrew analytics pulse on your campus?
Isn't that appropriate for Belgium?
Yes, Vic, as you know, there are institutions at different levels of sophistication in dealing with this, and Indiana University has a pretty good reputation for trying to make sense of all this. The only point I'd like to add to what my colleague said is that we're right now at a very interesting inflection point where most people think that we're in the process of rethinking and reinventing the core systems at the heart of the institution. ERP, learning management systems, analytics, and all the new and kindred bolt-on things we're talking about. And it's quite possible over the next 3 to 5 years that some really new in-the-cloud different solutions are going to emerge. The important thing at institutions is to really raise the strategic importance of these considerations and get the information around, get the parties involved. At IU, you've done a good job on the learning teaching and learning side of getting the various players informed and involved. This is really one of the big challenges we're facing, because the systems that we've put in place over the past 10 or 15 years are being outmoded and obsolesced by the new approaches. And so we're going to have to, this is another thing that the leadership is going to have to figure out, and they need all the input that they can get from the ground up about how this is going to impact the student experience.
Yeah, hi. My name is Eric. I'm from the Netherlands, and our organization mainly focuses on K through 12. So I was triggered about what Don was saying about the in-the-cloud solutions of learning management, of learning analytics systems. One of the things in the Netherlands is that the publishers have a really large influence on the education system. The teachers themselves use the methods that they provide. What are your thoughts about the developments in North America and the concerns that you might have if commercial parties come with solutions on learning analytics and their business models, and what concerns will there be for the schools to take into account?
The publishers are very powerful in the United States too. Everywhere they have invested millions and billions of dollars in creating increasingly large and bloated versions of textbooks, which the bloat is obviated somewhat by being online, but not much. There are new breeds of providers that take selected textbooks and scale them down and embed and have them available to the student with analytics and competence testing and everything embedded in that. Those are very favorable approaches. What it all runs up against, of course, are the politics of power and large investments that have been made by the publishers and by their allies. And there are a lot of new solution providers that are trying to offer alternatives to that. And how that plays out will depend on the conditions in each venue, I think.
I think it does present a real powerful center point that if you are sitting at the table together about that and you're all playing on the same game board for student success, all the better. Because then in your textbook and what you're publishing, you embed the tutorials, you embed the adaptive learning strategies, and each student then using the resources that are made available progress better. Part of the issue is who chooses the textbooks, and it's taken publishers, at least in North America, a long time to come to the table to figure out what was their role in that partnership, I guess.
So a bit again about the similar question as before, but you mentioned like the embedded learning analytics systems in like the course management, learning management systems. So my issue on that is if you do that research and you tweak those systems to be predictive, but then you also do learning analytics and possibly interventions at the student level, you have a bias to the administrative levels of learning analytic systems that might not be in the design of those, and therefore they might work completely differently than expected.
I agree. I mean, I think that's a great observation. I don't really have too much more to add to that. Yeah. It's a caution. It's a caution.
One or two more questions.
Let me just say that you're right, and the perfect shouldn't be the enemy of the good, in the sense that we're all working to try to make this mashup of systems on the campus work. And in order for that to happen, everybody's got to feel they have a voice to trumpet when things are sub-optimizing. And you're absolutely right. If people don't speak out, sub-optimization will happen.
So as somebody that's in innovation in a publishing company, let me raise some financial issues that I'd be interested in your opinion about. in higher ed, there's a pretty decent install base for access to technology for the student. So the kind of innovation you're talking about seems appropriate, and everything seems very good there. You haven't talked about the political backlash that I see evolving as a citizen, not necessarily my role in my work, but as a citizen, of the hyperinflation in cost for higher ed, which is leading to disparity in access and so forth. So my first question would be, could you comment on the technology issue there? But I also want to ask the flip side, which is in the K-12 environment, where it's funded by local taxes, which is a function of the the industrial base in those areas, and high poverty schools have low tax rates and therefore don't have good access to technology. And the predominant level of access to technology in K-12 is there's a lab in the school, you can get to it an hour a day. Ongoing, ubiquitous learning analytics, as we've seen today, is not really an option. Even electronic textbooks is not an option. So when we talk about innovation in the publishing circles, the first thing everyone says is, yeah, but how are they going to use it? The funding model doesn't support it in the United States unless we want to go to the hyperinflated higher ed model, unless I don't understand the economics.
Well, first, you're absolutely right in the hyperinflated model, and what we would say is it's not sustainable. As futurists and as people watching what's going on, in fact, Clayton Christensen recently was quoted as saying 50% of the universities probably won't be in existence in the next, I don't know, what do you say, 10 to 20 years. But the issue is because the model's not sustainable. We can't keep funding the way we are in a cottage industry model of every faculty being a unique independent contractor, so to speak. So that's one, and two, we're pricing students out of the market. There was an attempt by the president early on when he was elected, President Obama, to actually make the first 2 years of college funded, or at least the first year of college funded, because of acknowledging that a knowledge age required the comparable funding that high school had as sort of mandatory high school. That doesn't get us anywhere other than would these analytics help hone in better to where are the readiness variables, so be ready, and also the intervention variables that meet students' needs just in time instead of too late, so you can improve on this dropout rate. And finally, the idea of a value add, this EPS or educational positioning and career system would have something that better puts in place, claim a major and get going on it. That was one of what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation said. Get a marketable degree by the time you're 26 so that you don't lump into the poverty cycle again. Get something going instead of this idea that we at least in the United States, think that this is the place where people find themselves in college and university. And I'm going, that's a real pricey finding yourself idea. So anyway, I think that can be debated a lot longer on where we're going to go next.
And we know we need to conclude, but in terms of all of your questions and all of the stories that each of you share, we hope that what we have talked about has resonated with you. We look forward to the continuing conversations. We all believe strongly in the power of academic and learning analytics as part of crafting these transformative strategies for our institutions. It's about time, don't you think? Okay, let's have a thank you for being here, and we look forward to the continued conversation.